One of those teams, Garrett, that canceled their spring game. And listen, the attendance, jokes that were made at this university's expense, I think top tier, well deserved. But I mentioned off the top that USC is getting a lot of ground support right now for an improved 2025. There's a lot of folks that are buying in on Lincoln Riley that are saying that the defense is going to take a step forward this year, that somehow USC is now ready to start contending for championships again, even though they are well down the pecking order as it stands right now in the Big Ten. In fact, I looked at the FanDuel expected win totals this year that were just released today. It's February 24th for those that need a timestamp. USC's over under is 7.5 wins. So I'm struggling to figure out where the support is coming from when you look at what Lincoln Riley has done at USC. It's been absolutely nothing spectacular. In fact, really, it's been a waste of talent and resources so far under Riley's administration. Yes, the recruiting is seeing a nice little uptick, but as Oregon fans were very quick to point out in the USC comments, which, by the way, the Trojan social media accounts are retweeting commitment graphics. I didn't know that was a thing. That's a separate sidebar. But Oregon fans were very quick to point out when USC boasted, hey, we have the top recruiting class for the year of 2026. Oregon fans were like, dude, you guys had that last June, and look where it got you, right? Nothing special. And so help me make sense of this, because where I stand right now, yes, it's nice that USC is winning some recruiting battles. They're certainly going to have a lot of young talent, but they had a lot of established players leave via the portal or leave via graduation. And like I said earlier, they weren't winning games with all of that talent anyway.
Yeah, I think it's a leap. And when you said 7.5 was their number, I immediately ran over to the schedule because I was like, this has got to be schedule dependent. It's kind of schedule dependent, but my issue is they go to Illinois this year. They've got Michigan at Notre Dame. They've got Iowa on the schedule. They go to Oregon. They go to Nebraska. There's some tough games on the schedule this year that, I'm not necessarily going to pencil in the win for the USC Trojans, but I think, man, I kind of go back and forth on this because there's a part of me that knows that, like, Lincoln Riley can run the offense. He can turn a quarterback into something. And the offense always seems to be a pretty decent product out there. I guess the defense is improved off of, like, maybe the worst defensive coordinator we've seen recently. So I guess technically maybe improved, but you're still going to have to play some big boy defense before I trust you in the Big Ten. And you're also still going to have to prove that that talent doesn't just drop off. I mean, we're a couple years removed from a generational talent who's now, at the helm for the Bears. And, we're kind of moving on and figuring out, like, who's the next big guy and trying to figure out, like, who's going to be the next stud at the wide receiver spot. I know they had a bunch of transfers out there. I'm not going to necessarily buy it right now. And you kind of teased on the, front end about the attendance stuff, but that's kind of part of why is the culture doesn't really care around the school. The culture doesn't really care about winning as much because I know that USC, those games for a lot of their students is like the pregame for a night of partying, right? They go to that and then they show up to somebody's house party and then they just like kind of rock for the whole night. I don't know. Like, and again, I'm not trying to go too much into the outside of football sides of it, but I just don't know where the fan involvement is. I don't know where the enthusiasm is around the program right now, and that's what's going to have to win to get these guys to stick. Recruiting classes don't mean jack anymore. Being able to retain players and keep them on campus, that's what matters. And if you can't keep a guy on campus, great. Congrats. He signed a paper with you and he wore your hat when he was a senior in high school. That doesn't matter, right? That none of that actually ends up meaning anything when he transfers to a rival within your conference even, right? Like all those Oregon fans you were saying, pointing it out, what happens when all their good players transfer up to Oregon? Just head on up the coast and now we're going to go play at Autzen. Like that's a thing that could happen. I don't know, man. I'm not in on the Trojans. I'm not necessarily a hater, but I also just don't necessarily believe in Lincoln Riley's ability to build a championship program. He didn't build it at Oklahoma. He maintained it at Oklahoma, kind of kept it on cruise control. Then he ran away basically because he didn't want to play in the SEC. Now he got stuck in the Big Ten. I don't think he really wants to be in the Big Ten either. I wouldn't actually be surprised if he's got one eye on the door, kind of thinking about like, when do I make my exit? Who's going to call me from the NFL and I'm going to take that job? I don't know. I'm not really sure where he is with that, and I don't trust him to build a championship program.
USC is the West Coast Ferrari right now. They've got a lot of speed. They're going to have a lot of sizzle. They're going to look great getting off the bus. But Lincoln Riley has never built a physically imposing football team, right? You mentioned Oklahoma. Yeah, they could win in a track meet, but when they absolutely needed to compete against the big boys from the SEC, they got beat up front in the line of scrimmage, right? We've seen that be an absolute disaster for most of his time out at USC, and he's tried to recruit guys up front, defensive line. The offensive line was cheesecloth for a time. Now,
Yeah.
they've certainly made improvements on both sides of the ball, but we still haven't seen a USC defense specifically, and maybe Danton will turn it around, but we haven't seen a USC defense yet that's capable of even competing to win a Big Ten championship, let alone saying, yeah, let's hang the banner. They got a couple of guys from the transfer portal this year from SEC programs, right? Jarrett and Keyshawn Silver, I believe, both come over from Georgia, and then Silver was a former 5-star at Kentucky. So great. You're plugging them in the interior of the defensive line. It was an improved USC run defense last year. In the top 50, I think 53rd was where they ended up for 2024. But then the issue was the secondary. They were 98th in total yards given
Not
up
very
through the
good.
air. I don't know if they're going to have enough in the secondary to continue to improve that drastically, right? You need to
Mm-hmm.
be able to see them take big steps. Furthermore, they likely have a 5-star that's going to push for playing time right away, right? And Hassan Longstreet. We'll see what the quarterback situation
Mm-hmm.
ends up looking like at USC, but we know that when Longstreet flipped from Texas A&M, the big push was, hey, you can come and play here immediately. You're not going to have to sit behind a Marcel Reed at Texas A&M. So yes, I understand that, boy, there's a lot of really fun recruiting pieces coming in. There's a lot of exciting freshmen and sophomores that look good, that their high school film is really good. They played well in the bowl game. But when it comes to contending against that Big Ten schedule and being a team that's worthy of a 12-team playoff, I'm happily going to be at the back of the bus here. I'm not fighting to get that first seat like it seems like a lot of the media is right now. I'm perfectly content saying, Lincoln, I'm on the opposite side of you right now. I think you're on the hot seat. Show me what you got. And if he can, then great for him. Happy it worked out.
Right.
But so far, I mean, I just haven't been impressed with anything that USC has done.
Well, and the other thing about roster construction is like you can be excited about the players you have coming in, but you have to ask yourself what they're replacing and what you expect of them. Like if Hassan Longstreet is that guy, what is he doing to replace the Caleb Williams followed by the Miller Moss? Like what is he really improving on from that as a freshman? Like maybe, in a couple of years he turns out to be incredible, but as a freshman, what are we expecting of him that's going to be so much better than what we saw out of teams that couldn't win at all, couldn't really compete with like a Miller Moss or like like I said, Caleb Williams? Like, what are we expecting from him? What are we expecting from pick a receiver that you weren't getting out of a guy like Zachariah Branch or,
Yeah.
any of the other pieces? I mean, they've got a stable of guys that it seems like have rotated through there, and it hasn't mattered. They've had lots of really talented guys across the field. And, Bear Alexander went out there and they're all the pieces, and it just hasn't actually turned into anything. You have to show me that those talented players turn into something and that you can develop players on campus, coach them up, put them in a position to win, understand what your players do well and what they don't do well, and then put them in that spot so that they don't fail. Like they haven't shown me that they can do that consistently, and they certainly haven't shown me they can do that against the best teams on their schedule.
At Illinois, Michigan, at Notre Dame, at Nebraska. And then you've got Iowa at Oregon a little bit later on in November. It's not the toughest schedule that they could have had, right? No Ohio State, no Penn State. But but certainly not a friendly schedule by any stretch of the imagination. So,
Yeah.
listen, if you think we're just USC haters, comment. Let us know what your equation is that you're using to get USC to 10 wins, to championship contention. Because I'd love to have that discussion with you. Maybe my personal formula sees parts out greater than parts in, but that doesn't mean I'm not the in the majority here. There's a lot of support right now for USC. So
Yeah.
not hating on them at all. I'm
Yeah.
just for me, just to make it to use a personal example, and we'll move on. This smells like Texas A&M super class, does it not? I mean, and they don't even have a 5-star in their class yet, but this idea that, oh well, but we've been stacking recruiting classes, here it comes, and the rest of the country is like, yeah, but we don't think your head coach is very good,
Yeah.
right? Like, where has that narrative? Why has that narrative failed to go west to LA? Is my question.
I was going to move it 90 miles the other direction towards the west. I was going to say it kind of feels like they're in the middle of their Tom Herman out there at USC, where like you're going to get some big wins. You've had some pretty good seasons, but it hasn't really been what you expected. And for the talent you've had on campus, for the promise you've had of how good your coach is to be the guy, it just hasn't really turned into anything of real note. And I think that, USC, they may not have a Steve Sarkisian coming up around the bend. I don't know if that's true. But I think they're in the middle of a Tom Herman type of thing where you're going to get some big wins. You're going to have some great players that come through there. It's just not really going to turn into wins the way you probably want to. And a big part of that, kind of like what you've mentioned, it's been the lines of scrimmage so far. And so I think, it's time to probably say that, you know what, I don't know if Lincoln Riley can't win at all, but he may not be able to win the big one. And we certainly know he hadn't shown it at Oklahoma when he had a program built for him. And you want to talk about guys like Ryan Day being born on third base. I mean, Lincoln Riley was born on, halfway to home. So I don't know what he's supposed to say to defend himself at this point.
Yeah. Steve Sarkisian, former USC head coach, 2014, 2015. So
if only they could have had a guy like Steve Sarkisian.
If only.
Gracious him. How about